Dudleytown, a place so haunted, even Ed and Lorraine Warren claimed it to be demonically possessed. These are the hidden secrets of Dudleytown, the most haunted place in America. Sitting on top of a hill in the quiet forested town of Cornwall, Connecticut, lies the now abandoned Dudleytown. It was originally settled in 1747 by the Dudley family and is now part of the privately owned Dark Entry Forest. There are tons of rumors and urban legends surrounding the place, mostly that it's cursed. The story goes that the Dudleys brought a curse over from England that doomed the village to fail. It had started off like any typical settlement of its time, with folks building homes, farming the land, and mining for iron, but by the late 19th century, the village was completely abandoned, with the last resident, John Patrick Brophy, leaving in the early 1900s. Tales of a curse that drives people insane have been told around campfires for generations, and according to some, the demons that tormented the original settlers are very real and still linger in Dark Entry Forest to this day. So what exactly is this so-called Dudleytown curse? Well, supposedly the Dudley family's troubles began long before they ever set foot in America. Back in 16th century England, Edmund Dudley, an ancestor of the Dudleys who would later settle in Dudleytown, Connecticut, met a grim fate. Edmund was beheaded in 1510 after being accused of treason against King Henry VIII. This marked the beginning of a curse on the Dudley family. His son John Dudley didn't fare much better. John attempted to place his own daughter-in-law, Lady Jane Grey, on the throne of England, but his plan failed miserably. Lady Jane, along with John and his son Guilford, were all executed. Fast forward a couple centuries, and Gideon, Abiel, and Barzillai Dudley settled down in a small, isolated area of Connecticut that would come to be known as Dudleytown. From the beginning, things weren't going well. The town sat between three large hills, creating this eerie atmosphere where even at noon, darkness seemed to hang in the air. The land wasn't really that great for farming, and the winters were brutal. The community never really took off, and by 1854, only 26 or so families lived there. But it wasn't just bad luck that plagued Dudleytown. Strange things started happening. Some say that the curse was at least partly responsible for many of the residents' slow descent into madness. Over the years, strange and unexplainable events plagued this town, driving a lot of them to the brink of insanity. It wasn't just the harsh winters or the failing crops that took their toll on the community. It was something darker, something that seemed to lurk in the trees. One of the most famous tales is that of General Herman Swift, a soldier in the Revolutionary War. He lived in Dudleytown with his wife, and the story goes that Swift's wife was struck by lightning while standing right on their porch. General Herman was never the same. He spent the rest of his days lost in grief and paranoia, convinced that this town was cursed, and he wasn't alone. Other residents reportedly experienced terrifying visions, heard strange voices, and felt this overwhelming sense of dread that they couldn't explain. Some people started going missing, only to be found days later wandering through the woods, babbling incoherently. And then there were those who disappeared and were never seen again. And considering how small this settlement was, it definitely makes these stories a lot more unsettling. One story goes that one night, an entire family went missing from their home. Neighbors reported seeing the family's house lit up. They heard noises as if they were still inside talking, but morning came and they never came out. When neighbors finally went to check, the house was completely empty. Another tale goes that a local woodsman went out to chop wood and never returned. No trace of him was ever found. And this was an experienced outdoorsman who knew the area very well. The disappearances were often accompanied by strange occurrences too, like footprints leading nowhere, unexplained sounds in the night, and a general sense of foreboding that seemed to be hanging over the town at all times. Some began to think that there was some malevolent force lurking in the trees. Then there's the last resident of Dudleytown, John Patrick Brophy. After his wife and children went missing, He spent the rest of his life searching for them, but to no avail. And if you think these stories are only old legends, there are more recent disappearances too. In 1945, not really all that new, but still new compared to these older stories, a group of young people hiked into the woods and were never seen again. And in 1975, a woman named Susan Denham vanished while hiking in Dark Entry Forest as well. So what caused people to finally leave Dudleytown? By the late 1800s, the harsh environment, the poor soil, and the general doom and gloom that came with all these rumors of a curse and a demonic entity stalking the forest, it just made living there a pretty bad time. The town's population began to dwindle. Soon there were only about 26 families living there, all of them dealing with their own troubles and tragedies. It's hard to say exactly when and why these families finally left, but they gradually moved away in search of better opportunities. Was it the sense of dread and the strange happenings that just became too much for people to bear? Or was it just not a place where they could thrive anymore? Well, by the late 19th century, Dudleytown was deserted. Buildings fell into disrepair. Nature began reclaiming the land. What was once a small, struggling community had become a ghost town. But what remained, aside from the lonely homes, were the dark rumors and legends, which only grew over time. As the years went on, people started visiting Dudleytown, and many people, the ones lucky enough to make it out of the forest alive anyway, had some strange experiences. Odd animal behavior was a common occurrence. Many visitors noticed that their dogs would react strangely when they approached Dudleytown. Some dogs would outright refuse to enter the woods, visibly scared and uneasy. Others became unusually aggressive and agitated, barking or growling, seemingly at nothing. There are also stories of deer behaving in bizarre ways. Some have seen these animals standing perfectly still for long stretches of time as if frozen in place. Others have claimed that pets that wandered into the Dark Entry Forest sometimes went missing, only to return weeks later, appearing extremely stressed or traumatized. Of course, Dudleytown is said to be haunted, with tons of reports of ghostly apparitions and strange sounds coming from the forest. People would describe hearing horrible screams and eerie whispers emanating from the woods in the dead of the night. Some hear heavy footsteps trudging behind them, and of course, when they turn around, there's nothing but trees. Some have also reported hearing the clanging of chains and menacing growls, almost like a wolf's, but this mysterious wolf never shows up, which is definitely for the best, as eerie as it is. One of the most haunting phenomena reported, though, has to be the sound of music coming from the woods, an eerie melody coming from nowhere. The ghost stories of Dudleytown are just as chilling. A former resident of Dudleytown, Gershon Hollister, is said to appear as this shadowy figure, often calling out into the night for help. Hollister had died in 1792 after falling off a barn he'd been building for another resident. There's also a tale of a group of young men who snuck into the forest to explore Dudleytown late one night. They ended up being chased away, but not by an angry local like they'd been expecting. Whoever or whatever this thing was, it had no face, no discernible features of any kind for that matter, just a dark, shadowy form. They finally made it back to their car, only to be terrified when they turned around and saw the shadowy figure right behind them. Suffice to say, they drove away and never came back. There's also a terrifying legend about a strange mist in Dark Entry Forest known as the Devil's Breath. This eerie mist is said to rise up from the forest floor, and some say it's not just fog. The story goes that anyone who breathes it will die instantly. In the early 1800s, Dudleytown was still a mining community, but accidents in the mines were becoming pretty frequent, with a number of miners losing their lives in mysterious ways. And some of the residents started to believe that this mist, the Devil's Breath, as they called it, was to blame. They thought it was a form of divine punishment sent to torment the town for its sins. In 2016, a group of ghost hunters decided to investigate Dudleytown. They set up a camera and a microphone in Dark Entry Forest and let them run overnight. What they captured was a strange mist appearing out of nowhere, moving in a way that didn't seem natural. Even more unsettling, the microphone picked up noises that sounded a lot like whispers and footsteps. And speaking of dark entry forests, there are some spooky stories about it as well. For starters, people will often say they have this oppressive feeling, like the air is being weighed down with sadness and despair, and that this overwhelming feeling hits you from the moment you set foot in the forest. And then there's the silence. A deep, eerie silence that seems to swallow all the sound, leaving only the crunch of footsteps or the rustle of leaves. It's said to be so quiet that the slightest noise feels almost out of place. Some people who visit the forest have experienced lost time. They'll wander in, thinking only a short while has passed, but when they check the time, hours have gone by. In 2019, a group of ghost hunters decided they were going to venture into dark entry to find Dudleytown. Well, one of the group members, David, suddenly went missing. Days went by, and fortunately David did show up again, but he had no memory of what had happened. And there are countless other stories of people feeling disoriented and confused, unsure of what happened during these missing hours in the forest. Now, if you are a paranormal enthusiast or you just want to see what all the fuss is about, you'll have to do your digging from a distance. Dudleytown is completely off limits. It's on private land, and the owners have slapped a big "Do not enter" sign on it. And sure, it does kind of make you wonder if there really is something going on out there, but the main reason is locals aren't big fans of the ghost stories. They want to protect the area from people poking around and vandalizing the place, which is obviously understandable. Over the years, a bunch of people have tried to sneak in, hoping to explore this haunted village, but they usually end up with a ticket or worse. But admittedly, the ban on visiting just adds to Dudleytown's mystery. The stories about it being haunted are still there, but with no way to see the place up close for ourselves, the legends have, in a way, become stronger than ever before. With all that said, I've been your host, James, and I'll catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.